All right, what is going on, Laker fans? Hopefully, everybody's having a nice Sunday morning, Sunday afternoon, I guess you want to call it. Not exactly ideal. Lakers dropped their last two games. Excited to have one of my good buddies and frequent guest of the show, and does a fantastic job covering the Los Angeles Lakers, Jovan Buha of the Athletic. What's going on, Jovan? How you doing, buddy?
I'm doing well, man. I'm tired. It was a crazy night last night. I know we're gonna get into it, but just this team, man. I don't know. They continue to confuse me.
Well, not just you, brother. Everybody. Okay, I'll go back to last night's game for a quick second, and then there's some other stuff that I want to get into. Um, it felt like to me, I mean, as big as the game was, and we kind of all knew we all knew what to expect in this game. Yes, it's the Lakers and the Warriors. You're kind of everybody's trying to get at that number 10 spot, see if you can move up. But after the first quarter, when Anthony Davis leaves the game and they make the decision that, all right, second half, AD is not going to be there. I don't know how you felt, but for me, whatever hype that I had coming into the game, I almost felt like it just went away. I just didn't feel like, and I know Lakers made it close a couple different times. Just didn't feel like there was a path to winning without Anthony Davis. Did you feel the same way once AD went out?
Yeah, yeah, and you could kind of tell. For me, it started in the second quarter where so he goes back to the locker room in between the first and the second quarter, and he typically returns to the game around the 7 minute mark. So I was kind of tracking that as far as okay, he's back there, but like, is he going to come back around the 7 minute mark? Like, is he going to come sit on the bench? And then the seats that we have, we're sitting right behind Rich Paul, his agent. So we
Mm-hmm.
see him go back to the locker room. Then I see Rob Pelinka, who sits kind of diagonally behind the Lakers bench, go back to the locker room. And those are the first couple warning signs. Then
That's a
I
good
see
point.
one of the strength and conditioning guys who had gone back with AD come out, and he starts talking to the bench. He starts talking to the coaching staff and players. And then the final sign for me that he was just probably done for the night was Maxwell Lewis, who typically sits on the second row because there's not enough seats there on the Lakers bench, moves up from the second row to the front row and basically takes AD's seat. So that to me was like, okay, I think he's done for the night.
Mm.
So we didn't get official word until early in the third quarter, but obviously Jackson Hayes started the second half in AD's place. And according to Darvin Ham, the Lakers doctors were working on AD through halftime and hoping that he can make a second half return, but he just never got cleared. So once, I mean, I think for me, it was kind of like midway through the second quarter. I was like, all right, he's probably not coming back. And from that point on, I mean, they were +6 in the 12 minutes he
That's
played.
right.
He played the entire first quarter, and
Mm-hmm.
they were -13 the other 36 minutes of the game. So that was kind of it. Like, AD to me is such a key in this specific matchup because he can dominate their front line just with his, like we see against smaller front lines. AD is incredibly dominant and can swing a game. And then their entire defensive strategy is about top locking the Warriors guards and wings and funneling them toward Anthony Davis in the paint. That's what the Lakers did against the Warriors last season in the playoffs. And it was a very successful defensive strategy. And obviously they won the series. So not having AD on both ends really in this matchup is like a fatal blow. So the second he went out, and then you look at no Jared Vanderbilt, no Gabe Vincent, no Cam Reddish, no Christian Wood, like just the sheer amount of size
Oh
and
yeah.
length and defense that they didn't have. Like, it was just they weren't going to win the game. Like, I kind of knew at that point, like, this game's over.
And that's kind of what I meant. And yesterday was one of those games. I think losing to Sacramento, the way they lost to Sacramento, there's obvious frustration, and you kind of understand that. All right, last night's game is not the same as some of the other ones. Let me actually stick to that because I think you mentioned something about Anthony Davis that I'm curious to get your opinion on. What have you thought about his game these last couple of weeks or so? And I think he's had some matchups where we both agree if Anthony Davis is not playing for the Lakers, the chances of them winning that game is almost slim to none. Especially when here are the Golden State Warriors; they're playing desperate as well. They got Steph and Draymond come back, didn't play in the last game, and Steph didn't play for a few games. So let's put that to the side. But what did you think of AD over? Think about some of the wins. You could call out that Minnesota game where he put up historical stats, but then some of the losses where he's getting outplayed by Yusuf Nurkic or Domantas Sabonis or Nikola Jokic, which probably is not fair because I think everyone gets outplayed by Jokic. Even the game against the Bucks where the Lakers end up winning that game, Giannis had a good game as well. What have you kind of made of the last couple of weeks of Anthony Davis?
Yeah, it's been rough offensively. I think defensively, for the most part, he's still been himself. I think he's slipped a little bit just because, in general, I think the Lakers' defense has slipped as they've played more offensive-minded groups. I think you look at that starting lineup. Like, how many plus defenders would we say are in that starting lineup? It might only be AD. Like LeBron, when he's really engaged and active and like locked in, but we know, he can't really do that every single night, just given the mileage and the wear and tear on his body. He's still dealing with that left ankle injury, 39 year 21. Like, it's excusable to an extent, right? Like, I think in a playoff setting, you expect LeBron to be fully engaged defensively, but putting that aside, then you look at the rest of the lineup and it's like Rui in like some matchups. I think in matchups he can like leverage his strength and like defend guys in the post. Like he defends Jokic well or relatively well in the post. Karl Anthony Towns, like we've seen Rui can bang with guys in the post, but in terms of like foot speed and lateral quickness and like rotations, like he's not great with that. I think Austin has been better defensively coming out of the All-Star break. But there are some matchups where guys are just too quick for him or too strong or athletic for him. And then D'Angelo Russell has largely been a minus defender, though I think his help defense has gotten better this season. So like just looking at that starting group, which has been productive overall, they're not great defensively. And then you're bringing in certain guys that aren't great defensively off the bench. So like I just look at it like the Lakers defense overall has really struggled for 2 months now. They've really been, I think a bottom 5 defense over that span. But offensively, I look at it as like the couple of Kings games where, the first one in LA was one of his worst games of the season. And then you have that second one where he doesn't really get going until the fourth quarter. But by that point, the game's basically like Sacramento had a 15-point lead going to the fourth. That one was basically over. Then you look at even the Milwaukee game, like part of it was he did injure his shoulder late in the third, but up until that point, he was kind of having like an average game.
Sure.
I felt. And then Minnesota like dominates them, but they don't have their 2 best big men. And Naz Reid, for as good as he is as a backup, he's not really a starter and particularly like not a great defender, not a great rebounder. So AD just dominates that matchup. And then we've seen like OKC, the Clippers, would have been the Warriors, I think, had he stayed healthy. Like he can dominate these smaller front lines, and we have the sample size of that. But against some of the bigger, more physical ones, as you mentioned, Nurkic, Sabonis, Jokic, like he kind of struggles in those matchups. And it's kind of been like, are the Lakers playing a bigger front line? Then they're probably going to struggle. Are they playing a smaller front line? Then they're going to dominate them. And you've seen those kind of like wild swings from matchup to matchup. And look, and like I think part of it is like they have missed Jared Vanderbilt, they have missed Christian Wood. I think those 2 guys would help. Vanderbilt with his switchability, his defensive rebounding, and just his size and athleticism on the perimeter. And then Christian Wood isn't a great defender, but he is a really good defensive rebounder. So I think those 2 absences have maybe exacerbated some of the Lakers' weaknesses on the front line and just defensively overall. But we don't know when those guys are coming back. It's only 3 weeks left in the regular season. So there's a limited amount of time. And, I think, but I guess to get back to AD, like, I think offensively, it's been a rough stretch for him. He hasn't been finishing as well as he normally does. His jumper hasn't really been there. And I think it's I don't know if it's like a war of attrition where he's only missed 4 games this season. Like
right.
He's been available for basically everything. I don't know if that's caught up to him or what, or it's the defensive load that he's had to carry all season, but he's not looked like himself to me, at least on the offensive end recently.
It's interesting, Jovan, because you started mentioning the names. This is kind of where I was going to go anyways, but there's a point in that game yesterday where I'm looking down at the bench and I see Vando, I see Cam Reddish, I see Christian Wood, I see Gabe Vincent. Obviously, Anthony Davis didn't play after the first quarter. Um, what's realistic? And I know we don't know when these guys are coming back, but I get a lot of Laker fans that say, "Oh, there's no excuses for the Lakers." You know, if LeBron and Anthony Davis and D'Angelo Russell and Austin Reeves are all available, if those are your four best players, then please stop telling me about your fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth, and whatever you want to, wherever you want to rank those guys. Um, I agree to a point, but I also disagree to a point. They can use Jared Vanderbilt. There's a reason why they went out and spent that money on Gabe Vincent to give him 3 years, $33 million. Christian Wood, you know, on any given night, like you said, he can get you 10 points and 8 rebounds. I'm not saying he's going to do it every night, but at least that's an option for you there. I'm trying to figure out here because there's only 14 games left. We're under a month left of the regular season. So this point in a month, you'd probably be in the middle of a playing tournament. Do you have what's realistic in the sense of if a player comes back like Gabe Vincent, but Gabe hasn't played in so long. Vando hasn't played since February 1st. How much, if they do come back, do you feel like they can kind of intertwine with the Lakers? And how effective do you think somebody could be if they come back with only 7, 8 games left on the season?
It's tough. It's tough. I'm not gonna sugarcoat it. Like I think Vando is the most important one to me
Agreed.
out of all those guys, just because I think with Gabe, like there's an element of you already have LeBron, Austin, D'Lo, and Spencer. So in terms of like ball handling and that lead guard spot, I think you have enough bodies to like you don't necessarily need him offensively. I think you could use his shooting and you could use his point of attack defense, but like I think when looking at a potential 8-man rotation, there's just a chance that because he's missed so much time and because he is potentially getting implemented at such a late point in the season, that Gabe isn't in the top 8. Like even if he comes back, let's say like a week from now, there's just a chance that the Lakers already have their top 8 and that doesn't feature Gabe. I think Vando's in the top 8 regardless of when he comes back or what type of rhythm he's in. Like the Lakers need Vando, as we saw right before his injury. I mean, they win that game in Golden State where they play that group 19 straight minutes. Last year's starters with Vando next to the big four, and that group played incredibly well. Had a comeback against the Warriors. They win that game in double overtime. I thought in the Boston game that was maybe his best half as a Laker. That first half of just impacting the game on both ends. He made a couple threes. He was cutting to the basket, getting offensive rebounds. He was defending Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown. Like that was like the Vando experience in one half. And then he gets injured right at the end of that first half. And from what I've been told, the Lakers were actually planning on starting Jared Vanderbilt in that game had LeBron and AD both been available. And remember, they were both late scratches. They get ruled out after shoot around. But had they been, had they both played in that game, the plan was to start Jared Vanderbilt, not Rui Hachimura. So in that next game, LeBron and AD return against the Knicks, but then Vando's now out, and now they go back to Rui as the 5th starter. But the plan was going to be to go back to Vando. So like Vando is a critical part, and to me, like the Lakers season might just come down to is Jared Vanderbilt healthy and available. Like that's to me how important he is with his ability to defend multiple positions. And like I just think he slots so perfectly, particularly next to D'Lo and Austin, where like all the weaknesses you have with D'Lo and Austin, the defense, the rebounding, the size, you get all of that with Jared Vanderbilt.
Sure.
And he can plug all those holes. So like to me, he's that perfect 5th guy as long as he's being aggressive offensively, which we finally saw him do. Like Christian Wood is important, though I think Jackson Hayes has played fairly well in limited minutes. And then again, like Gabe Vincent, Cam Reddish, I think you already have Taurean Prince, you already have Max Christie. Like you don't necessarily need Cam Reddish, but the one guy I look at is like Vando, and can he come back within the next couple weeks, and can he give the Lakers anything defensively? Because the defense has been so bad that if they don't fix that, I don't see how this team goes on any type of run, because it's just been again, we have a 2-month sample size now of like them being a bottom 5 defense, and you're not winning anything in the playoffs if you're playing that level defensively.
Jovan, did they simply just punt on the idea of, we know this last year when they made their run, they were able to get stops when they needed to. And obviously Vanderbilt has a lot to do with that. I could go into the weeds of that, but did they just decide we're not going to beat teams with the players that we have that are injured because that is our defense? So let's just try to outscore teams. Was this just a, plan A can't work because we don't have those players? I remember Darvin Ham at one point when he took D'Lo out of the starting lineup, kind of talked about wanting the team to have an identity, and the identity was going to be defense. Did they just simply say, well, we can't be the team we want to be defensively, so let's just punt on that. We're going to try to outscore teams.
I think that was part of it. It was part of the calculation that they made a couple months ago. And for me, this was always the way that I kind of envisioned this team. And it made for the interesting start to the beginning of the season for me, because I remember doing like Lakers season previews, and I would talk to people and they'd be like, well, so this is a defensive big team that's gonna, kind of pick up their identity from last season. And just looking at the roster, I was like, yes, there are some plus like individual defenders, but overall, I think if we're ranking these guys in terms of like best to worst player on the roster, this roster actually trends more offensive. Because again, I think this starting lineup is the Lakers' 5 best players. It's their 5 highest paid players. And 4, if not, like all 5 are plus offensive players, but I would say 4 of the 5 lean much more offensive than defense, with the exception being AD again. So like looking at that and then thinking about like Gabe Vincent is a plus defender, but he was a critical scorer for the Miami Heat. Like Taurean Prince on paper is a 3-and-D guy, but he is much more of like a shooter and like a second side guy than like a defender. And Christian Wood has a history of being a double-double guy, but like primarily more of an offensive guy than a defensive guy. So I was just looking at like the key guys. And again, with the exception of like maybe Vando and AD, most of these guys trend on the offensive end more so than the defensive end. So I kind of felt this was the natural progression of the roster to some extent, but there is a Mendoza line with how bad you can be defensively and still be a good team. And this team has been below that Mendoza line for quite a while right now. So I think like figuring out the balance is a little tricky because again, I think that they are a bit limited with Cam has missed several weeks now, right? He's been in and out of the lineup. Vando's missed almost 2 months now. Christian Wood has missed several weeks. So like there has been just an element of like not as much size on the perimeter and the front line. So that certainly plays into it. Like the Lakers can't really, like you can only play Jackson Hayes and AD so many minutes together. And when you don't have both of them together, it's like you are kind of small on the front line to some extent, at least when you're not going with like the starters. So I think it's been a delicate balance trying to kind of like figure out the rotation, but I do think we have a sample size of all like for the season, their best front court combinations have always been bigger. And when you downsize to a Taurean Prince at the 3 or the 4, or a Cam Reddish at the 3 or the 4, or the three guard lineups have actually been a little bit better recently with the Dinwiddie, Austin, D'Lo, but like in general, this team has played better, bigger, and they haven't had the size lately. So like that's just kind of it's a bit reductive to just say like, oh well, they have injuries and this and that, but like it's been like that's what it is, right? Like they just haven't had their available bodies, the available frontline guys, and I think you've really seen that impact the defense, the rebounding, and that's why they've kind of been so up and down lately.
Our guest is Jovan Buha of The Athletic. Does a fantastic job covering the Lakers, talking some Lakers basketball here on a Sunday. Appreciate everybody tuning in. Please, if you don't mind, subscribe to the channel. Jovan, last time you and I chatted, it's interesting, just the timing of it. It was Spencer Dinwiddie was picked up off the buyout market, and just the time we had already decided that you and I were going to be chatting, and just maybe an hour before, 2 hours before, Dinwiddie signs. I don't want to spend too much time on him, but I thought it was, wow, this is great. You're getting Dinwiddie on the buyout market. D'Angelo Russell obviously has really made a strong case of can you just depend on me and stop trying to shop me every time? And we'll see what happens, because you still never know what will happen in the offseason, how far the Lakers go, what he does the rest of the season. I think it just always seems to be a conversation. But you mentioned that the 5 best players for the Lakers are starting. I don't disagree with you at all. What that's also done is really made that bench so thin. And yes, they got players that are out. Maybe, like you said a little bit earlier, hey, if Vanderbilt was healthy, maybe you do have Rui coming off the bench, and that kind of changes some of the dynamic of your bench right there. In your opinion, why has Dinwiddie struggled as much as he has? Really has not been all that effective in my experience of watching him, and I'm sure anybody here or yourself. Dinwiddie's had moments in the NBA where you're like, man, that guy can go get you a bucket at any time, get you 20 or 25 points. What have you noticed of why Dinwiddie, or you might even disagree with me if you don't think Dinwiddie is struggling, just your thoughts on what Dinwiddie's done so far?
So I'm actually gonna push back a little bit. I don't think I think two things can be true. Like I think he struggled offensively, but I think he's made up for it in different ways. So again, like not that plus minus is everything, but since joining the team, he has been one of the plus minus leaders with this team. The 3 guard lineups with him, Austin, and D'Lo have been actually productive, which I wasn't sure how that was going to go, but they've actually held their own. And I've been actually, pretty impressed with his defensive effort. Like I thought last night, the Lakers made an adjustment where they switched Spencer onto Klay Thompson. Like he was torching, like Max Christie defended him for a little bit. He torched him. Taurean Prince defended him for a while. He was torching him. And then they switched Spencer Dinwiddie onto him. And I thought he was doing a really good job, like tracking Klay around screens. And like, I mean, go back to the game sealing block on Dame and like
That's right.
his defense against Dame in that moment. Like, I think he's actually been a plus perimeter defender overall for this group, and definitely the best bench option in terms of just perimeter defense since joining the team. Now, offensively, I will totally agree. Like he is underwhelmed. He has struggled. I think he has overthought things, and you typically see this with a newcomer. If you sign a guy or trade for a guy in the middle of the season and they come in and like those first couple of games, maybe even the first 3 or 4, they're making the extra pass, right? Like they might have an open look, but like the guy in the corner is open.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So it's kind of like a new situation. You come in, you want to be on your best behavior. You don't want to come in and be the guy who's like hijacking the offense and just taking bad shots and like trying to play for yourself, right? Like you come into a new situation. You want to acclimate properly. You want to, start playing selflessly and really just kind of like get to know your teammates and make a good first impression. The problem has been that Spencer has continued to play like that, I think, over these last few weeks, where he's never fully adjusted to playing his game and just being himself. And as you mentioned, this was a guy who was one of the leading scorers on a team that made the Western Conference Finals. Like that Dallas team, obviously Luka gets a majority of the credit. Luka
Dinwiddie was great,
but Dinwiddie was great, and I want to say he was the second or third leading scorer on that team, and he was a big part of their success against the Suns. Pulling off that upset, and we've seen it where in Brooklyn or in Dallas, like he's a capable scorer. Like on paper, he is probably the 5th or 6th best player on this team, just in terms of his track record. But we've yet to see that offensively. So I'd like to see the Lakers run more stuff for him. I think that he's often playing next to either D'Lo or Austin. And because those guys are so good, a lot of the offense is running through them. But I'd like to see Spencer run more of the offense and have those guys kind of operate more as like catch and shoot guys and guys on the weak side who, if Spencer's running a pick and roll, maybe it's a swing to Austin or to D'Lo, and those guys can either catch and shoot or pump fake drive. Like they could create something on the weak side. But like I'd like to see the Lakers leverage his on ball skills a little bit more. I think it's been way too much of him just kind of being a caretaker offensively, playing passively, him being more of a catch and shoot guy, which isn't necessarily his strength. It is something he did well in Dallas, but he hasn't done it well with the Lakers so far. So like, I think part of it's a combination of Spencer is trying to play like perfect basketball,
sure,
and just be like this kind of fly on the wall offensively, and like I'm just gonna make the right pass and make the right read, and like that's valuable. You don't want him like it's kind of better than him doing the opposite, but there has to be a balance there. And then the second thing is like the Lakers have to just run more stuff for him and like leverage. This dude's talented. He's a proven bucket getter in the NBA. And if your offense is struggling with some of these bench units, you have the guy right there. Like run more stuff for him. I haven't really understood that.
Yeah, I think your observation, I couldn't agree more that he's got to be doing more stuff on ball, but there are a lot of players on the Lakers team. Reeves is probably most effective when he has the ball. D'Lo definitely most effective. LeBron most effective. But I think there are so many games now I'm watching Dinwiddie and I'm like, he's just sitting in a corner or he's sitting, 3-point line extended on. It doesn't seem like an effective way to use him.
Yeah.
And he clearly doesn't feel like a guy that's hey, swing the ball and I'm just going to hit a spot up shot. That's not his game, which I get it. There's certain players, you think of the Jamal Crawfords back in the day. You think of guys, Lou Williams. Some of these guys were just more effective when they had the ball in their hand. He's not a JJ Redick. He's not just think of other spot up shooters. But I'll be curious what the Lakers do with him and if he could turn his game around. I thought after when he got that big defensive play against Dame, like you mentioned, hey, give us credit on the defensive side. I thought that might spark something for him, right? Like he had a big moment. He had a play where he was effective. And I thought that might transition into just him feeling a little bit more confident, but that has not been the case. So we'll see how things go on that front. Okay, a couple other things I want to jump into real quick here. So a little bit earlier today, and as you and I are recording this, Dallas is going to be hosting the Denver Nuggets. That game's about to tip off. But earlier today, the Phoenix Suns, which might be one of the more, if we think the Lakers are confusing, go watch some Phoenix Suns basketball. They're incredibly confusing, but they basically get blown out. They give up 140 points to the Bucks without Giannis. And the reason why I mentioned that is, where we're sitting in the standings in the Western Conference, they seem to be the potential team that if the Lakers are going to, leapfrog anybody, maybe it's the Phoenix Suns. But right now, Lakers are sitting number 10 in the Western Conference. Golden State is 9. They still got another matchup against the Warriors. That's going to be at Crypto. That matchup's probably going to determine who finishes in front of each other because Lakers and the Warriors have a pretty easy schedule the rest of the way. See what happens with Dallas, and I mentioned Phoenix. My question, Jovan, is just kind of watching the Lakers and seeing what's happened. How much of a risk do you think it is right now? Let's put it this way. Would you be surprised at all if we're sitting here in a month and the Lakers season is over and they can't get through the play-in? Just knowing the circumstances, the teams in front of them, the potential of having to go play 2 games on the road. How realistic do you think it is? And do you think we're sitting here in a month and talking about the Lakers getting ready to go into 7-game set, or we're talking about the Lakers just not even making it to the playoffs?
Honestly, after last night, I think it's increasingly realistic. I still would give them slightly better than the 50% odds. I still believe in LeBron and AD in a single elimination setting. We've seen it where they've made the play-in a couple times. They've won both of their play-in games. They won all 7 games in the in-season tournament. So the track record speaks for itself where when LeBron and AD are both healthy and available, and we'll see with AD's eye kind of how this progresses. Doesn't seem like it's going to be a long-term situation. But when those two are both healthy in single elimination situations, playoffs aside, of course, obviously like the Denver series was its own thing. But like in a winner go home format, the Lakers have been undefeated in recent years with LeBron and AD. So I do think there's an advantage of not only like their collective postseason experience, but also just being through some of those wars together and kind of having the experience of like preparing for, okay, like this is how we're going to prep for a single game elimination. And like, this is the way we're going to game plan and like all those different factors. That said, like last night's loss did put them in the driver's seat to likely get the number 10 seed because Golden State has a slightly easier schedule than them. They do have a 2-1 series lead now. And if the Lakers win that final game, it's their final home game, the third to last game of the regular season, they do win the season series. So that would help. But Golden State has been playing incredibly well. Since really that double overtime game against the Lakers unlocked something with the Warriors, because that was the first time that they started Draymond Green at center. He had been coming off the bench, so they returned him to the starting lineup. And since then, they have the fourth best record in the NBA, and that's included stretches where Draymond has missed a few games, Steph has missed a few games. So like Golden State has been one of the hottest teams in the NBA since late January, and they've just been better than the Lakers over that stretch. So like if I'm betting on who's going to finish ahead, yes, if the Lakers can tie them, there's a good chance they win that game in April and they get the tiebreaker. But there's also a chance that Golden State just finishes ahead of them. And
sure.
Based on how both teams have been playing, then you look at the rest of the West and it's like Dallas has an easier schedule, strength of schedule wise, than both LA and Golden State. Sacramento's kind of middle of the pack, but Sacramento won the season series with the Lakers. They're up 4 in the loss column. That's a pretty big gap
with only 14 to go, and they have the tiebreaker.
Yeah, and then so Dallas is up 3, but given that they have the season series tiebreaker over the Lakers, that's essentially 4. And then you mentioned Phoenix, and that's the one where they did lose, so now it's a 3-game difference. And I'm looking at loss column because everyone's played different games, so like I think the games back is a little bit deceiving. I like to go just based on loss column. So 3 back in the loss column of Phoenix. Lakers do have the tiebreaker though, so that's the one team. Phoenix has the second hardest remaining schedule, behind only Charlotte. So like there's a chance if there's one team that's going to fall, it's the Suns. Now at the same time, they are finally healthy or relatively healthy, and with the big 3, they've been pretty good. So it's kind of like, can the Suns lose enough games for the Lakers to make up ground? Now the one silver lining for LA right now is if you look at the upcoming schedule, they have 3 more home games. They have a weird week where they play Monday, Friday, Sunday. But Atlanta, Philly, Indiana, they should win all 3 of those games. Then you go on the road for the 6-game trip. But when you actually look at the games,
very winnable games.
Very winnable games. Milwaukee's a tough one. And Indiana's like a kind of tough one. But Washington, Toronto,
Memphis,
Brooklyn,
I think, is on there.
Brooklyn and Memphis, like those 4 should be locks in terms of wins. So like there's a scenario in which the Lakers can go like 7-2 or somewhere in that range over the next 9 games. If you do that, you might leapfrog Golden State and then get yourself back into that like potentially 8 seed mix. But right now, with how big of a gap there is in the standings, like 8 seed is probably their best scenario in terms of like play-in finish. And then of course you got to go on the road, beat the 7 seed, and like, but that might be optimistic. I don't know, but we'll see. Like it's tough with the uncertainty with now AD in his eye. Like, does he miss the game on Monday? And then you have all the injured guys. Like, do they come back in the next 3.5 weeks? How do they look in the next 3.5 weeks? There's a lot of uncertainty, but I will say this next like 2 weeks, even though it is a bit road heavy, the Lakers should be able to go something like 6-3, 7-2, 8-1. And if you do that, you give yourself a chance to potentially leapfrog in the standings. But the margin for error is gone. Like that's the one thing. Like every game is a must win. You cannot afford any stinkers. You drop one of these, you drop a game to Memphis, you drop a game to Atlanta, you drop a game to Indiana. Like you are potentially locking yourself into the 10 seed. And now all of a sudden you got to win 2 games on the road just to get the 8 seed. And oh yeah, Denver's the favorite right now to earn the number 1 seed. So you potentially are going into a buzzsaw of playing Denver in round 1. So it's going to be tough. Like the Lakers basically have to play perfect basketball the rest of the season. But that's the situation they're in. And if they really want to go on a run, that's what they're going to have to do.
And it's funny because what you just said about the schedule coming up, I'm with you, right? Atlanta and Philly and Indiana and Memphis and Indiana again, Brooklyn. I'm with you that there's a lot of winnable games on that schedule. Indiana will be tough. I think the Pacers will be a tough game. The Lakers have told us all year that don't rely on them. But that's kind of this is their last gasp here. You have a schedule that's in front of you where you have a lot of winnable games. If they don't go the 7-2 or 6-3 at worst that you mentioned over those 9 games, I'm with you. And frankly, if you can't do that against some of the teams that we just mentioned, then we're talking about a team that already shouldn't get the benefit of the doubt, but I think just that just adds to it. What? Okay, let's kind of play this out real quick, and I think because this is the situation right now with the Lakers, they get in the playing tournament, and however it unfolds, whether they lose the first game or they win the first one and lose the second one, what do you think happens? What do you think happens if the Lakers do not make the playoffs and they can't get out of the playing tournament? What kind of an offseason are we expecting from the Lakers? Are there, and I know we're jumping far ahead, but that could be the case 4 weeks from now. Is it a lot of, well, we never really had our guys? Is it a lot of, no, we can build off of this? Is it absolutely not, we're running back the same team? We got to go make some, major changes, and maybe it is going big fish hunting, and you're looking to go add a third star. How drastic do you think the Lakers would be with some of their decisions if they can't get out of the playing tournament?
I think if they don't make the play-in tournament, that does increase the
Or
odds
if they
that
don't, I'm sorry, if they don't get out of the playing tournament, they make the playing tournament, but they
yeah.
don't get into the playoffs. Yeah.
So if you don't get out of the play-in, honestly, I think even if you lose in round one, and maybe Denver is an exception where it's like if you get the 8 seed and Denver just smacks you in like 4 or 5 games, but that kind of in and of itself is revealing of like the state of the team, and you were theoretically gonna have to go through Denver at some point,
Sure.
and maybe trying to catch them earlier could have its own advantage of like, let's just get it out of the way now. Like let's you got to beat Denver. So I think it's really going to depend on like how the season ends in terms of, again, is it you just lose in the first play-in game, like maybe you win the first one, lose in the second, or maybe you get into the playoffs and then you lose in round one. If any of those scenarios happen, I do think it increases the odds of something drastic happening. And I think that includes a hard look at the coaching situation. And I think like, because again, we're talking about the Lakers have basically had their 4 best players for most of the season available. And I know that, again, like those 4 guys don't necessarily specialize in like defense and rebounding and the dirty work. And they have missed some of those dirty work guys for several key stretches of the season. But if I told you LeBron and AD were going to miss a combined, I think it's 13 games right now. I think LeBron's missed 9, AD's missed 4. It's 13 or 14. If I told you that, and I said, what do you think their record is 68 games into the season? I don't think you would have said 36 and 32. I think you would have said something closer to like, 45 and 23 or so, something like they should be on paper, given even with the health issues that they've had. I think this is a team that should be fighting for a home court spot and not a team fighting for the number 10 seed.
Sure. Where the Pelicans are one of those teams. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
At least in that mix with the Clippers and the Pelicans and the Suns and the Kings, like that's where the Lakers should be, I think, theoretically on paper, given how healthy their best players have been. And now part of that is just like LeBron and AD being healthy and being on the floor together has not made the same impact that they made in recent years, right? Like those guys, LeBron's gotten older, AD has gotten a bit older. He hasn't been as effective offensively overall. So like part of it's not all on coaching, and part of it's on the roster and some of the limitations with the roster, and just like they didn't have enough reliable defensive players. They didn't have enough, I think, 3-point shooting overall, even though the 3-point shooting has been better. But I also think part of it comes down to the coaching and some of the games that they dropped, some of the lineup decisions, like Taurean Prince starting 50 plus games, or I think it was 49, just didn't really make sense. And the lineup data backed it up. Most, like basically any starting lineup with Taurean Prince was a net negative. Most of the Taurean Prince, I mean, he's last on the team in plus minus. And he's really been asked, like, and Taurean Prince has kind of become the scapegoat, and fans attack him. And it's like, it's not really Taurean Prince's fault. He was a guy who was signed for $4.5 million. Like he was supposed to be the 9th or 10th guy on this roster.
Sure.
Yet at times was relied upon as like the 4th or 5th guy on the roster. And that was just too big of an ask for him. So he has kind of become like the scapegoat, the face of the Lakers underachieving. But that's more to do with the way Taurean's been used rather than like Taurean and his specific limitations. So like, I just look at some of the rotational decisions, some of the 3-point defense, and continuing to leave guys wide open. Like even last night against the Warriors, I thought like they just weren't guarding Jonathan Kuminga, and he got into a rhythm, just hitting open jumper after open jumper. Klay Thompson, the defense was pretty bad against him. So like I just think that there's been certain strategic decisions and certain rotational decisions where the lineup data and the results have been pretty clear, and the Lakers have continued to make the same mistakes over and over again. And we're almost 70 games into the season. So at some point, I do think the coaching has to be reevaluated strongly. And if we have a 2-year sample size of like, yes, the team made the Western Conference Finals last year, but they won 43 games last year. And if we look at again, they potentially win 43, 44, 45 wins. Like on the surface, that they've underachieved in the regular season each of the last 2 seasons. So like at some point, if you have a short window with LeBron and AD, and if you continue to underachieve, I think that warrants a stronger look at a potential change.
It's a good way to put it. I think a lot of Laker fans feel, by the way, the same way. I think there's a lot of questions around Darvin Ham, and I think it's fair. And ultimately, I think how the season ends is going to determine his future and the coaching staff's future. And I do believe if we're sitting here a month from now and the Laker season's done, I think it's interesting what you said about making the first round and you just have a matchup with Denver. And what if the Lakers actually won a couple of games, but they still lost to the Nuggets? It went 6 games. Is that enough to, make a complete overhaul and a change? So a lot of different scenarios can play. Jovan, I got one more question for you. This one's going to be more around the Western Conference. And as always, I appreciate the time. For those on Twitter, Instagram, and right here on YouTube, at Jovan Buha. So catch his channel, catch all his platforms that he's on. Literally doesn't get any better of covering the NBA and the Lakers, and he does it for The Athletic. Final one I got for you. Just, I think we all know everyone's chasing the Nuggets. I think that's they have earned it. They are right at the top of the standings again. It's kind of tough to find weaknesses. They have the best player in the NBA. They might have the best number 2 player in the NBA, right? Just looking at the duo and what Jamal Murray does and when he knows when to press his buttons, the role players they have, Michael Malone. But let's just take the Denver Nuggets out for a quick second. What is the rest of the Western Conference? Who are some of your favorites that you like after them? I've pretty much heard everybody say that they don't trust the Oklahoma City Thunder because they're so young. Actually, up until yesterday, Anthony Slater came on the pregame show and he's like, "Hold up a second. I know they're young. I know they don't have the experience, but can we stop counting them out?" What do you make of the rest of the West after the Denver Nuggets? Just the 1 or 2 teams that you think watch out for these squads.
Yeah. So I'm probably a little bit higher on the Thunder than the average NBA fan or NBA analyst. I think the inexperience is an issue, but to me it's more their issues are more matchup based, where if they play an imposing big man, as we've seen, like Anthony Davis just destroys Chet Holmgren and like their front line. But like if they can get a matchup with like say the Clippers, where Ivica Zubac is a sturdy, like solid starting center, but he's not gonna be putting up like 25 and 18 every night and just like dominating Chet in that way. Like he might win the rebounding battle, but he's not gonna just completely take over a game. So like a matchup with like the Suns or the Clippers, I think bears well for the Thunder, even maybe against the Timberwolves. But I do think there are some like the Lakers, maybe the Kings with Sabonis, the Nuggets with Jokic. Like those are the matchups where I think if you have like an all-star level center, you can just push them around and dominate the paint against them. So OKC to me might be the most matchup based first round opponent of like, if they get the right matchup, I could see them winning and going on a little bit of a run and being a feel good story. They get the wrong matchup, I could see them losing in the first round. Minnesota, I'm out on. I've heard Karl Anthony Towns is going to miss at least a couple rounds of the playoffs. And if he's out till the conference finals, I think people are underselling how big of an impact that is for the Timberwolves. Like he's their second best offensive player. He's their best shooter. and it takes away their ability to play two big lineups. Like you can play Rudy and Nas, but a lot of it's been Towns kind of shape shifting around those two guys and complementing them well. So I think Towns being out to me, like, I mean, we'll see how the matchups break up, but I'm almost certainly going to be picking whoever Minnesota's playing in round one to upset them. I think like
Minnesota, Sacramento.
So that's like, I'm not a big Sacramento guy, but then I see what they've done to the Lakers, and I'm like, I don't know. Like
and I just say that
close to me.
If the playoffs started today, that's your 3-6. If and I'll go back to the Thunder one too. Thunder Dallas. So I think, and I just say that because you're talking about matchups. You're right. I agree with you that there might be some matchups where these teams can kind of survive a little bit. And Thunder is, if Thunder got Dallas in the first round, that's a world of difference than if they got the Lakers in the first round for them. Yeah. So I think that the matchup thing's interesting.
Yeah. So I look at, I think the two teams I look at, I tentatively look at the Clippers. I think they've played really well since that terrible start. I think that 0-5, 0-6 with James Harden.
Yeah.
Then they had like a 2-month stretch where they had the best record in the NBA. Now recently they've dealt with some health stuff, and that's always the risk in believing in the Clippers is they just can't stay healthy. And, I think they're also susceptible to imposing front lines. Like, that's why I think it's been a good matchup for the Lakers. And I think like they might struggle against a team like Sacramento with Sabonis, but Clippers, like, I'm not as high on them as I was maybe like a few weeks ago, but I still think depending on the matchups, they could go on a little run. And then I look at the Phoenix Suns, and I think I'm one of the last people to still have stock in the Phoenix Suns, but I believe in star power. Call me crazy, but I think Devin Booker and Kevin Durant are top 12 players in the NBA. I think maybe the Lakers and like playoff Jamal Murray are like the Lakers and Nuggets are maybe the only two teams that can match that combo of KD and Booker. Then you add in a guy like Bradley Beal, who I think is properly slotted as like a number 3 guy. So like if they can stay healthy, and again, health is a big thing for them, I kind of like that group. Like Royce O'Neal has fit in well. Grayson Allen is having a career year. Nurkic has surprisingly had a bounce back year after a couple of down years in Portland. Like I actually think the top 7, like I didn't even mention Eric Gordon, like their top 7 when healthy, I think is pretty solid. And then again, you just have that offensive firepower with KD and Booker, to say nothing of Bradley Beal. So like the Suns to me are probably the dark horse of if they can get the right matchup, if they can play the Thunder or the Timberwolves, I think they can win that series and potentially go on a run. They play the Clippers or the Nuggets. I probably lean Clippers or Nuggets. But right now the West is honestly a giant game of rock, paper, scissors.
Yeah.
And it's really like, it depends on the matchup. And like, I could see like potentially 3 first round upsets just based on the lower seeds getting advantageous matchups. So like, it's really wild. Like I didn't even mention the Pelicans. The Pelicans have been one of the best teams in the NBA for like
one of the more consistent ones
going on several weeks. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah. It's funny because I think Jovan, it's what I think would be great for the NBA is you have new matchups, right? Like I think the what we just talked about right now, if it is Dallas OKC, that's a new, we haven't seen that before. If it is Sacramento and who did we say was Minnesota, it's a new matchup. And I think it's, maybe this is a changing of the guard because here's Steph and LeBron battling for 9-10. Here's KD just trying to stay, here are some of the best players that have ever played the game 7 through 10. And, I know for Laker fans, we don't want to see that. But at the same time, you got to give credit to all these other teams in the Western Conference, the develop of some of these other young teams, the development of some of these other young teams. So it's going to definitely make it exciting. So should be a fun rest of the month of March, obviously, first couple of weeks of April. And then when the dust settles, I think there's going to be some great matchups coming up.
I will say, I'll add one thing quickly. So we talked about the doomsday scenario for the Lakers of, of course, not even making the playoffs, but like, let's say you get in and you play Denver one. There's the opposite scenario where you get into the playoffs and OKC is number 1. Like right now they are tied in record going into today's games. Denver does have an easier schedule, so they are the favorites to earn the 1 seed. But like, I think the within the realm of like upset potential. I think if the Lakers get the Thunder in round one, they can win that series. And I also think if somehow the like, you know, we'll see what happens with Lakers Warriors in terms of like 9-10 or one of those teams jumping up. But like, I think those two teams can potentially go on a run if it's like OKC 1, Minnesota 4, and like that's the side of the bracket that they're both on. I could see the Lakers or the Warriors going on something of a Cinderella, kind of similar to last year with the Lakers.
Sure.
Like, do you make the second round? Do you make the conference finals? Like, I think it's in play. So again, it really is just going to come down to how does the bracket shake out and how do your strengths match up against your opponent's strengths? And like right now, there's like half the teams in the West play well against big teams, half the teams in the West play well, smaller. So like it's really interesting to see how this all shakes out.
Can't wait, buddy. Hopefully Lakers can go through that stretch that you were talking about and keep themselves in the mix, but it should be fun. Jovan, thank you, brother. Greatly appreciate the time as always. Like I mentioned, please subscribe to the channel here, but also go check out Jovan Buha on all the platforms on Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube at Jovan Buha. I'll be back tomorrow. We'll talk a little Lakers after they play the Atlanta Hawks. And we'll see if there's any updates on Anthony Davis as well. Appreciate it, Lake fans. Thank you very much. And we'll get back with you guys coming up tomorrow. Thank you.